Hello and welcome to this Easy 11 Plus lesson on answering personality-based comprehension questions. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe and click the bell button. Don't forget that Easy 11 Plus is live in this channel every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. The worksheet for today's lesson, along with lots of other useful resources and links, is in the video description. And let's get started. So, what is personality? And this is something you need to think about also when a question asks about character. Well, personality is the way that somebody fundamentally is. So for example, if I turn to Carol and say, Carol, what's the time? And Carol says, mind your own business. It's reasonable to judge that Carol is somebody who gets angry easily and perhaps irrationally. It might not necessarily be the case, but it would be a reasonable deduction if you saw that exchange in a comprehension text. On the other hand, if I turn to Carol and say, I don't like you, and Carol says, why would you tell me that? It wouldn't be reasonable in that circumstance, if you read that exchange, to think Carol is a really angry person, because that's a situation in which many people would naturally get angry. So you can't really say this shows that Carol is a particularly angry person, that's fundamentally part of her personality. Now, when you get a question that says something like, how would you describe how would you describe this character's personality, give evidence from the text, there are certain common mistakes that you need to be aware of. So, first big common mistake is to talk about things that aren't really personality points. So for example, you might say something about a person's appearance. He is tall. That isn't their personality, it's what they look like. If you said, she is a computer programmer, that isn't personality. If you said, she is somebody who is naturally interested in the details of things and in solving problems, which might also be something that comes from being a computer programmer, then you're talking about personality. So there's an important difference between the two. Another very common mistake is the thing I touched on right at the start, which is talking about transient behavior and feelings rather than about personality in a more fundamental way. Is this an angry person, or is this a person who got angry at that moment? There's an important difference. So you need to look for clues in a text about how somebody really is in their nature, something that's lurking there inside them all the time. And that's your challenge. It's rather difficult. Another common mistake is when the points that you make aren't different enough. So for example, if you said, he gets scared easily, and then in a different point you said, he's nervous about new experiences, these aren't completely the same thing, but they're close enough that you might not get all the marks in the exam if you made these 2 points, because they're both about being scared, nervous, anxious, which are overlapping ideas. So be careful of that when you're choosing what to say. Another very common mistake is something we can look at here. And it's about how you structure your answers. So, a really common error is not to properly link each piece of evidence to each point. So for example, look at the first example here, which is called no. So you make your first point, you make your second point, and then your third point, and then at the end of your answer you say, here's some evidence, here's some evidence, here's some evidence. And in that situation, for one thing, it's very hard to show how each piece of evidence links to your answer. And for another, you can't really explain your point using the evidence because the point and the evidence are separated, cut off by a load of other writing on different points. If you look at the example that I've called yes, this is a structure that works perfectly well. Here is point A, here is the evidence for point A. Here's point B, here's the evidence for point B. Here's C, here's the evidence for C. It's completely clear, but it doesn't really encourage you to use the evidence and work it into your points. A really excellent structure is something like the even better option at the bottom. Point A, here's my evidence for point A. This is point B as supported by this evidence. So already I'm varying the structure a bit and really linking the evidence into the point. And then you can even turn it around. This evidence suggests point C. And that's the kind of structure you see in people who are really confident with this kind of question and have a real feel for how to develop an argument. But if you're just developing your technique, the second option here, where you give a point in the evidence, a point in the evidence, a point in the evidence, is a pretty good one to practice as you get started. But don't do the first option. That's bad. You might get the marks anyway, but you might very easily not get all of them. And a last very common mistake is not giving evidence that's specific enough. Each piece of evidence that you give needs to really clearly and directly match and demonstrate the point that you're making. So be very careful with that. Now, the process for answering a question like this involves, to start with, going through the text very carefully. The first thing you need to do is look through the text for moments when a character does, thinks, or says something. And if you find that this moment suggests a personality trait, write a quick note in the margin, even just one word like angry, to suggest what that personality trait might be. The next thing to do is to think carefully about the question, the number of marks available, what they're asking you to do. So for example, if the question asks for points in evidence and there are 6 marks, you might reasonably conclude that you need at least 3 points. So a point and an example to back it up would be likely to be worth 2 marks, so you're likely to need 3 things. And these need to be different and clear points with evidence to back them up. So if you've found 4 or 5 different possible different personality points in the text, you need to choose the 3 of them which are strongly supported by clear, simple evidence and which are definitely different from each other and are definitely about personality, going back to what we were saying before. And then the last thing you do is you write the answer fully dealing with each point so that it's clear and properly explained, but not waffly. Let's have a go. Here's our text. You've probably already read this in the worksheet. If you haven't, I suggest that you pause the video here, open the worksheet, read the text, and then come back to it, because I'm not going to read through the whole text here, because that will be a waste of your time. Let's have a look at this. And what we're doing, we're looking for moments when this character, Richard Hannay, who's hiding on top of a house for doves, fleeing German spies before the First World War, moments when he does or says or thinks something which suggests something about his personality. And what helps us here is that this is a first-person narration. In other words, he's writing about it as I, and that means that everything he says comes from him. It's his opinion, it's his view of things, so anything might offer hints about his personality. That really helps us. The beginning here shows him waking up in a lot of discomfort, and then he describes the things that he sees. Sounds came to me, men speaking throatily, and the throbbing of a stationary car. So even though he can't see everything, he can work out a lot of things about what is happening. So you might already look at something like this and say that he is, the fact they're speaking throatily as well, very detailed. You might say that he's very observant. And these notes are just for me, so even if an examiner couldn't clearly read your handwriting here, as long as you can, that's the main thing. Honestly, this does say observant, to me anyway. We learned that he lay baking for all that afternoon while he was suffering from the torment of thirst. This suggests somebody who's very determined. Once they've decided to stay there, to not reveal their location, even pretty extreme suffering doesn't shake them from that. So I think this is quite a clear point which we might well use, determined. Now we get on to line 24 and we see him saying, I wish them joy of their quest. Well, these are his bitter enemies. So here he's being quite ironic. Of course he doesn't wish them joy on their quest. He wants them to fail and go away. So he's ironic or humorous. Now this is one of these moments where you need to be quite careful, because at this moment he is being ironic. To turn that into a statement about his personality, you need, for example, to say that he has a strong sense of humour, because even in this extreme situation, he's still capable of being ironic in the way that he thinks about his enemies. In line 32, he's been looking at this strange clearing amongst the trees, and he says, it didn't take long to guess what it was. It was an aerodrome, and a secret one. This is another case of him being very observant. It might even be better evidence than what we saw before, because he's looked at this feature on a hill and worked out what it is. Observant. In line 41, we got a strong emotion. I grew furious. And when you see a character showing strong emotion, that can often provide really good clues about personality, because the things that make us feel emotional and passionate are often the things that reveal something fundamental about us. If you think about the things that really inspire your emotions, I think you'll see that they're really quite closely related to who you are. I grew furious. What does he get furious about? He grew furious to think that our enemies had this secret conning tower. This means an observation point. If he's really furious about the idea that these Germans have a secret base in Scotland, that suggests to me that he's very loyal to his country, and there's a word for that, which is, hopefully you know, and if you didn't, you will now, patriotic. And then you notice that if the aeroplane comes back, he'll be discovered, almost certainly, but the aeroplane's late, and then it's already getting dark when he hears the aeroplane returning. Right, so we've got a number of points here. We have got observant, determined, humorous, observant again, and patriotic. So we've got 4 different points. Now, which of these are strongest and which of these are the easiest points to make? And is there any overlap? Well, for one thing, I don't think there's much overlap. These are clearly different points. Which points are strong with clear evidence? Well, observant, I think this is quite an easy point to make. We've got several points of evidence, so I like that one. So I put a little tick. Determined, he's lying baking on the roof, but he stays there and doesn't budge. Again, that to me is a strong point. He's ironic, humorous. You could debate whether he's being ironic in this moment or whether it shows something fundamental about him, but I think if he can do this in this situation, he must have a pretty well-developed sense of irony. That's also quite a strong point. And what I like about this point is we've got one clear, precise quotation that we can use to back that up. So that for me is also something of a winner. And then we got this point here about being patriotic, because he's furious to think the enemies had the secret conning tower. To be honest, that's also quite a good point, so we could use that. But as you'll see, this is a 6-mark question. You really don't need 4 points. It's just going to use up your time. If you've got 3 really good points with evidence and you write them reasonably well, you will get those marks. And in an exam, it is not worth wasting your time. So what I'm going to do here, I'm already happy with the other points. I'm going to put a tick in brackets. And what that means is, this is a good point. If I get to the end of the exam and I've got a spare few minutes and I've checked my other answers, I might well add this point in just to be ultra sure with this question. But it isn't the one I'm going to focus on. So, last consideration here, what order are we going to make the points in? We've got observant, we've got ironic and humorous, and we've got determined. I think that a really clear personality point to start with is determined. Now I'm choosing that because I think it's a clear one to write about, but also because it's sometimes good not to make your points in the order of the passage, just to make it obvious to the marker that you aren't trying to retell the story, that you're going to do your own thing. What are we going to use in terms of quotes here? He lay baking on the roof for the whole afternoon, suffering from thirst. I think those 3 words, baking and thirst, show how much he's suffering. All the afternoon shows how determined he is, because he stays there for that time. So let's go down into the answer space and write that point. Now look at the way that I've put this together. So I haven't made a point and then dumped a big quotation. I've got 4 one-word quotations which are dropped in through my explanation. This is a really good way to do it. If you take a long quotation, if you say, here's my point and here's a long quotation from the text, the marker might think they don't completely understand how the text proves their point. They know the evidence is somewhere in this section, so they've quoted the whole section, but they don't know exactly what they're doing. If you can take specific words and phrases and use them as part of your explanation, then you show that you really understand what is happening. So if you can learn to do this, it's a really, really powerful technique. It also saves you time and space because you don't have to copy out long quotations as well as making a point. And finally, notice how I do all of this in one single sentence, which really clearly demonstrates how the point and the evidence to support it belong together. Okay, let's move on and make another point. Now let's talk about irony, because we've got one clear piece of evidence to back this up, so it should be quite easy to write. We've got, obviously, I wish them joy of their quest. And now let's write this point down below. When Hane wishes his enemies joy of their quest, he demonstrates a strong sense of humour because he can be ironic even in this situation. And if you go back to our discussion of structure, you can see that this looks quite like the end of the third option here, because here we've started with the evidence and then explained how it supports the point. And now we've got one more point to make, so we're going to talk about how observant he is. And there are lots of things that we found here. Personally, I like the aerodrome point, because noticing that a sound is a car or that people are speaking throatily, that's relatively easy to do. I think you would still get the marks if you said that he was observant and gave that as evidence. But the aerodrome point, I think, is even better, because it didn't take him long to work out that the clearing on a hill was an aerodrome. Notice I'm looking for the really short little bites of information in the text that I can easily use when putting together a sentence here. He is also very observant because it didn't take long for him to work out that a hilltop clearing was in fact an aerodrome. And now we're starting with the point, then giving the evidence, but again, see how I've worked the evidence into my explanation. You'll often have heard about giving point, evidence, explanation. What's even better, if you can use short quotations, is to write a point and then provide an explanation with evidence. And if you can do this, you're onto a winner. So that's how you do it. We've got a really clear answer here that very obviously gets 6 marks. Let's read through it quickly. Hane is determined because, despite the baking heat and his thirst, he stays on the roof for all the afternoon. 2 marks so far. When Hane wishes his evidence joy of their quest, evidence, you'll get the mark as long as the evidence is relevant to the point. He demonstrates a strong sense of humour because he can be ironic even in this situation. He's also very observant because it didn't take long for him to work out that a hilltop clearing was in fact an aerodrome. And that's how, if you use the clear system I've suggested of going through the text, looking for points where the character says or does something, noting the personality trait, then choosing your most different, best, easiest to write about, 3 points in this case because it's a 6-mark question, and then putting them together with a really good answer structure, you end up with something really good that you can be absolutely confident will get the marks. It's taken quite a long time to explain, but when you're good at this system, it's really, really quick and simple to apply in an exam. I hope that was useful. If it was, please like the video, please subscribe, and please click the bell button. I hope to see you back here on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock for one of my live sessions, and I will see you then. Goodbye.